t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'as fait manquer, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hi there, welcome to Brussels, my love, Euronews' political chat show with me, Maeve McMahon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Coming up, another week, another election and another set of major gains for the far right. Last weekend, the Austrian Freedom Party beat the traditional Conservatives, winning over hearts and minds on issues from immigration to inflation. Aspiring Austrian Chancellor Herbert Kickl dreams of a fortress Austria. We discuss why he and other far-right firebrands are so popular across the EU. And in 2016, the British people voted to leave the EU, leading to years of torrid and tense negotiations to thrash out a Brexit deal. This week, Prime Minister Keir Starmer met Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, perhaps marking a new era for UK-EU ties. Brussels rolled out the red carpet for the visit and spirits seem to be high. But the question is, does anyone really care? A warm welcome to our guests this week, Tomi Huhtanen, the Executive Director of the Wilfred Martin Centre for European Studies, Sophie Poinschlegel, Deputy Director of the Europe Jacques Delors Institute, and Bruno Waterfield, Brussels correspondent for The Times. Thank you so much for being with us. But as always, before we get your analysis, let's just tell our viewers who won the Austrian elections.
We have forced open the door to a new era. This is Herbert Kickl, the leader of Austria's Freedom Party and the winner of last week's parliamentary elections. Known for his anti-European pro-Kremlin tendencies, his FPÖ party won 28.8%, ahead of the traditional right, who got 26.3% of the vote. Turnout was solid, with 8 in 10 Austrians showing up. It's still unclear whether Kickl himself will get to govern, but the result is part of a much wider EU trend, and populist and nationalist parties are seducing voters across the continent.
So there you have it. I guess the first question, what has the view been from here from Brussels, Sophie? I feel like we've seen this movie before.
Yes, it's not the first time. It reminds of the European elections, of course, the French legislative elections in July, and now you have Austria. I think you can see that there's clearly a right-wing shift in Europe. And the question is, how will the centre parties deal with it?
How will they do it? And who is this Herbert Kickl, Tommy, and what does he stand for?
I would say that the current election result, this was not really, surprise. It has been boiling in the polls already long time, and in a way we see that the Austrian People's Party, they are in a key makers position. But what we see is the low middle class revolt. That what we see in Europe, and where the populist parties are new workers' parties.
And of course, a lot of young people voting for him. We could see him there in that video there, standing beside a lot of young, very enthusiastic people who stand by his beliefs.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's one of the significant develops. There is this shift is a huge structural shift. The element that's like a redux, that's like a replay here in Brussels, is the circling of the wagons, the cordon sanitaire, the firewall. How long can you carry on locking out these parties who represent very significant parts of the population, very significant parts of the people? This is democracy. The cordon sanitaire, the firewall, is beginning to look like it's about closing down democracy. And in fact, the longer it goes on, the greater it actually drives support for the populists and the revolt against the elites.
It's gradually disappearing, though. Is it not, Sophie?
I think it is, and you could see it with the votes in the European Parliament plenary on Venezuela, for instance, where EPP and ECR are working together, and also Patriots for Europe. I think that I would disagree, though, because the issue with far-right parties is, of course, they represent close to 30% of the electorate in certain countries, not all countries. It's still not a majority. It's a very vocal minority. The problem is that these parties are fundamentally anti-European and anti-democratic. And I think that's a bit of a danger. And you could see that, especially with Hungary, where I don't mind them coming to power. The problem is that then if they make sure that we don't have free and fair elections anymore, then we have an issue. And I think the fact that we need to have institutions and we need to have free and fair elections, and if these parties cannot accept the democratic rule, then it's a problem. They say they do, but I'm not sure they do.
But in Austria, in the case of the Christian Democrats that you're affiliated with, your think tank, they have said that they would go into power with them.
Yeah, I think it's very important to see that not there are different parties in far right and far side of the parliament. So it's a question about the issues and questions. So the strategy, Bruno, you're totally right. It's not working this in the cordon sanitaire. Or we see that the right is expanding. So the strategy there is go issue by issue, seeing where you can cooperate, but still respecting the fundamental, principles and values.
Well, let's just bring in a voice, shall we, from the Freedom Party to hear why they feel they won over 1/3 of the Austrian population. We can take a listen to Harald Filmski. He's an MEP with Patriots for Europe, the party or the group affiliated with the Austrian Freedom Party.
Dass die Menschen das, was wir in den Wahlkämpfen.
The result shows that what we promised in the election campaigns is obviously what people actually want to see implemented. That was the case in European politics. That is now the case in Austrian politics. And the fact that Herbert Kickl was once again able to raise the level of the party is brilliant, great, a huge pleasure, and also a mandate that this must now be the subject of future policy.
Künftigen Politik sein muss.
So Harald Filmski there, the Austrian MEP. Now, of course, this party have won the most votes, but they haven't got enough to govern. So we still have to wait and see if they would manage to do so. But Bruno, let's just talk through the issues that they stand for. Anti-immigration, Fortress Austria, opposition to sanctions against Russia, very Eurosceptic. Why are voters in favour of all these issues?
I think one of the policies or arguments they have that has real resonance, actually much more resonance than their arguments about Ukraine and Russia, because the polling doesn't show great support for those policies on the whole, is actually the migration debate. And the migration debate is about a set of institutions and relationships, Europe's Schengen zone, that simply don't work. They don't work in terms of the fact that since 2010 there's been something like 9 million people coming into Europe, first-time asylum seekers. Around about 40% of those are irregular entrants across the EU's external border.
Disagree with that?
No.
And that has translated into real internal security problems for countries.
Would you agree with that, Sophie?
No, not at all. I think it's a populist message, and we actually need migration. If you look at our labour markets, we have a demography issue in Europe, and of course it's a question what kind of migration. But I think that populist parties have been very, very good at linking the migration issue with social issues, and they're becoming the grievances party. You said it; they're becoming workers' party. If you look at the statistics, it's mostly lower incomes, it's uneducated people, and it's mostly men voting for them. It's changing now.
Uneducated people have the vote.
But of course they do. I'm not saying that they
yes.
haven't, but I'm saying that there's really an issue where they manage to kind of bring together everything around the migration issue and making migrants scapegoats.
We need qualified workforce, but unqualified illegal, and I think there is the issue. And when there is the question, how do you tackle the populist movement? The immigration issue is the trigger. Whether it's left solutions or right solutions, but we need to handle that, because that's always the issue. Because now they are in responsibility in governments, they get in problems, but they always take with some or other excuse the issue to the immigration and those problems. So if we want to get rid of this problem, so to say, we need to handle the immigration issue.
If I agree with you, Europe does need immigration. I support pretty open borders. I support immigration. Europe needs an Ellis Island, in fact, in the Mediterranean, but people need to show who they are, and you need to be in control of who comes into your country and why. Let's not forget that a year ago, a Tunisian killed 2 Swedish football fans here in Brussels. That Tunisian had served 2.5 years for cocaine smuggling in Sweden. He had himself escaped from prison in Tunisia, where he was serving time for murder and manslaughter. They couldn't get rid of him. He then kills 2 Swedes. The guy in Solingen killed people.
Well, you have far right people.
He shouldn't have been in the country. Mannheim shouldn't have been in the country. And people
This is our government's responsibility, Bruno, for not taking control of this issue. And we've seen migration mismanaged for so many years.
And voters are responding with that. And rather than just sneering at them for being uneducated,
let's bring in
you should
Sophie.
listen to them.
don't raise your voice. I think one of the issues is mostly integration policy, and I think we failed at that, and I think mainstream parties have not tackled the issue properly, and I think you can see that now, they're pitching the finger on the wound. The problem is that the answers the far-right parties are giving to migration are deeply against human rights, and they're against people, and they're instrumentalizing the issue in a way that does not respect democracy and human rights. And I think that's the most issue. And then they take, faits divers, as you say in French, stories like you had like the knife attack in Solingen, and then they make a big issue out of it. If you look at the statistics, and I can only speak I'm French and German, so only for Germany, the biggest issue, the biggest political violence you have in Germany is the far right. And that's the real issue we're talking about. Of course, you also have, Muslim immigrants that might, also be crazy or, I don't know, be terrorists. It happens. But if you look at the statistics, and it's very hard, of course, to talk with statistics, it's easier to, make a political message and to say, look at this issue, this is why we need to control migration and throw out every immigrant there is.
There's a fact, as you said, then there's a perception. But then it's how do you manage that perception? And as I said, there are real problems. Mm-hmm. And there's a feeling that those problems have not been addressed, And
they feel that many voters feel that their answers are being addressed by certain parties, who are also, by the way, very vocal and very clever on social media, on TikTok. I mean, many have been calling the AfD the TikTok party, algorithms as well, and studies are showing that a lot of people are voting for that, especially young people who, according to studies, between 16 and 24, a lot of first-time voters only use TikTok to get all their information on politics. But let's not just talk about Austria, because of course this is a trend, as we're saying, all across the European Union. And currently in 2024, the far right or very nationalist parties are in government or in coalition in Italy, for example. Centre far right coalition with Giorgia Meloni as Prime Minister. Croatia, we have a new coalition government with conservatives and right-wing nationalists. Hungary, we have Fidesz, right-wing. They're affiliated with the Patriots for Europe. Slovakia, governed by Mr. Fico, known for his pro-Russian populist stance. Czech Republic, we have Civic Democrat Party, a member of the European Conservatives and Reformists. The Netherlands took 244 days to negotiate a government, but now the Freedom Party is with 3 right-wing and centre-right parties. And then Finland is in a 4-party coalition with the far-right Finns party. So this is a trend, really, we're seeing here.
Yeah, but now you're bulking all the parties. You're speaking about
they are
very
different.
Very different parties with very different policies, with in totally different positions on Ukraine, Russia, economic questions on many. So that's a little bit, I think the strategy there to open that up is to see exactly what are the policies, which are the red lines, and on which we can cooperate, and then work on the government program.
But I think the takeaway here is people are fed up with the mainstream politicians. They do not trust the state, Bruno.
And I think the point you made about TikTok and social media is very, very interesting, because you're looking at parties or the support for parties that is new, but is a new phenomenon on the whole. Fidesz, for example, in Hungary is old. I mean, that goes back to 2010, Orban getting into power. But you're seeing the rise of new parties, new voters who are engaged, and they're engaged via mediums that are outside the traditional established route for information. That's a challenge to everybody. It's quite a good challenge, because it's a challenge about debate. I mean, one of the problems with the response to the rise of populism, the populist revolt, has been a desire almost to return to the days of disengagement. And I think the rise of a populist civic revolt is a very, very positive development. People across Europe should be really excited about it, because politics is waking up again. It's really good.
Politics is waking up. Well, it certainly is. And meanwhile, Sophie, we've seen Mario Draghi recently in his report saying the EU needs to work like one country if it needs to actually function. But of course, this will be very challenging if we see the picture of governance now across the EU, with many governments not having much backing either from their people.
Yes, I think after the European elections, mostly journalists, you said the centre holds, it's fine. And I think that's also quite a dangerous narrative, because we see that the far right is rising slowly and incrementally. I think we do have now still a centre, but it will be extremely difficult to find political compromise. And I think the biggest issue is also how the Centre Party, and especially the European People's Party, will react to that, because I think we have now a responsibility for democratic parties to respond to the grievances of the people in a way that isn't populistic and far-right.
Well, the European People's Party, we can see its leader, Manfred Weber, grabbing control of that party. I mean, what's going on inside there now?
On the issue, I would say, the basis, the social economic decline of the lower middle class. That's the basis of this, this upfold. And then you have the main trigger is the immigration issue, which is always. And so if we deal with those two issues, I think.
So they're the problem, not you guys. Not the traditional politicians.
Yes, for sure. Well, I think the whole I think we have been maybe scared to go to certain issues, find real solutions. Like issue of immigration, there has been a certain set of proposals being played for 2 decades. They have been not working. We see the trend that it goes to, more restrictive policies. Look at Denmark, with social democrat government. They put quite, you could say radical agenda, and they don't have right-wing, really right-wing parties.
I think one of the really big problems looking at it, stepping back and looking at the European level as well, is that institutions need to change. Institutions haven't worked. I mean, these people using the term grievance, I think is right, but there's a sort of pejorative, negative element to people. People's interests have not been served by the institutions that exist today. And the whole point of democracy is you can vote to reform, even to abolish institutions. Voters backed parties that abolished.
I think
let's be honest here, the institutions are not very good at communication. So even if they do something, they don't get the message out.
I think that's a radical view to say abolish the institutions. That's a very simple solution to problems that aren't addressed by it. What do you propose then? If you say, okay, let's abolish the institutions.
If we close down the commission.
I said reform, and sometimes reform does mean abolition.
Europe used to be the policies. Europe used to be the policies. Europe used to be a domain of empires, emperors. And kingdoms, and the rise of democracy changed that, and it led to the abolition of institutions, the rise of new institutions and parties, such as the Social Democrats, and that was very positive. So I'm saying embrace it. This is a real chance for political renewal.
I don't think it's the institutions we need to abolish. I think it's true that there were policies that didn't work for the people. And I think that...
And one lady that would agree is Marine Le Pen, who did very well in the recent elections. I'm mentioning her because, of course, she's the president of the far-right National Rally. She has her sights on the Elysée. But this week, she's on trial, accused of misusing European parliamentary funds. A couple of her colleagues as well are facing the same charges, but she spoke to Le Figaro and she said that she is not concerned about this. She's approaching the trial with serenity and nothing will prevent me from standing in these presidential elections. Does she stand a chance, Sophie?
We'll see in 2027. It's very hard to say in the crystal ball whether she will win. I think it very much depends on what Macron is going to do. I think it was not a good idea to have a government that doesn't reflect the results of the French legislative elections. That was not a good idea. We'll see now it's more of a technocratic Barnier government. I think from a Brussels perspective, Barnier is seen, as someone who's strong and stable, as you could say in the English context. I think in the French context it's very different. And I think Macron has a little bit lost touch with how annoyed citizens are in France.
But it's interesting how scandals are not damaging these politicians. Voters don't care about scandals, Tommy.
Yeah, indeed, it seems to be part of the picture,
In the United States as well, but even if you look across Europe, Spain, Vox's party allegedly got a loan of over 9 million from a Hungarian bank to fund their campaign, but voters don't care.
Well, I think, scandals are part of politics. Scandals is part of Italian politics, part of the warp and weft, French politics to
British politics,
as we're seeing Keir Starmer having to give back some money for Taylor Swift. And I think concerts, and if you look at the European Parliament, the European Parliament has long been notorious for the amounts of money sloshing around, the lobbyists, the abuse of parliamentary assistance allowances. The European Parliament is almost partly defined by its transactional
And
corruption.
one woman who was keeping an eye on all that was the Ombudsman, outgoing Ombudsman Emily O'Reilly, who tried to reform,
I have to say.
tried to change that culture. Very briefly, Tommy.
Yeah, indeed, this influx coming money. We speak about hybrid threats, but I think we should focus on that much more, both on the right and left. I think what you mentioned, money from a Hungarian bank, all that. I think there's a lot of money floating from outside Europe.
A lot of money floating. Unfortunately, not in my bank account, but on that point, we can draw this conversation to a close. We will definitely keep an eye on those coalition talks in Austria and keep you informed on Euronews.com. But for now, stay with us here, because after the break, we'll be telling you why the Union Jack made a reappearance in Brussels this week. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, along with our panel, Tommy Huhtinen, Sophie Pornschlegel and Bruno Waterfield. We're just taking a look back at the news of the week. And one that we wanted to reflect on was this. The UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, standing alongside EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen this Wednesday in Brussels. The first trip of its kind, Sir Starmer was here to express his enthusiasm for a fresh start in the EU-UK chapter. That was, of course, shaken to its core over the past decade. It was the first time a UK Prime Minister visited Brussels for years and looks like an attempt to reopen this new stage after a couple of years of mistrust. So we're all looking at Bruno, of course, around the table. You covered this extensively. So how did you feel about this week? Is this really a fresh start?
I think the reset is real. The tone is a real change. Sir Keir Starmer coming over here, it's been some pretty intensive work going on in the background, also with capitals, Paris and Berlin particularly. Some capitals are more open than others, perhaps, to putting some substance to the reset. But now the hard work begins, if you like. They're going to have some regular summits. Keir Starmer said the detailed work now begins. And as ever, with the European Union, the detailed work is where the difficulty begins. And so now he has to embrace some real difficulties. He's got red lines, he says, single market, not joining the single market, customs union, or free movement. They sound like good red lines. They're pretty permeable, though, in terms of, veterinary checks, perhaps, of chemicals regulation. The EU, of course, wants youth mobility. That's a very difficult ask in the form it's currently couched.
Let's just take a listen to him. Let's take a listen to Sir Keir Starmer to hear why he made the trip over.
I firmly believe that the British public wants a return to pragmatic, sensible leadership when it comes to dealing with our closest neighbours, to make Brexit work and to deliver in their interests, to find ways to boost economic growth, strengthen our security and tackle shared challenges like irregular migration and climate change.
So Keir Starmer there, he wants to make Brexit work. We've heard that before. What has the view been from circles here in Brussels?
I think that the focus on security and defence cooperation, I think it's a great one. I think one point which has not been often mentioned here in Brussels is actually, of course, after Brexit there was a lot of raw emotions which kind of disappeared a little bit on COVID times. But during the, when the war in Ukraine started, it was in fact the UK who, was very clear on defending Ukraine. And the moment, in North, when Finland and Sweden applied, started the application process for NATO, it was only UK, Boris Johnson, who came to Stockholm and Finland and signed the cooperation agreement. So I think there was a lot of positive, that created already a good psychological, political basis for future cooperation. I think that's
and beyond that, of course, because we all knew that when it comes to foreign affairs and defence, I mean, the UK, of course, is a military power. But on the other issues, how did people feel here around the town on that visit? Do people still care about the UK? Do they still miss them?
Not that much. I think not as much as the UK thinks it does. And I think that's one of the issues. It's nice to see that there's a change in tone. That's absolutely true. I think it's very important for the UK government to understand that they shouldn't go try to sneak behind Brussels back and just go to national capitals thinking they can get some kind of bilateral deals. I think that was not seen as something positive. But then there's issues, and I would agree that security is really something we should work on. I think on the other hand, the UK is not in a great economic shape. Europe isn't. So I think there's really some, interests to work together. And the biggest issue is, of course, regulatory divergence. We have Brexit. Now the question is, what legislation is Brussels doing? What is the UK doing? And how do we manage to kind of not diverge too much? And I think that's an issue they will have to tackle.
Yeah, the issue is that there is no political quick wins. After with these red lines, that means it will be, very transactional and quite a bureaucratic negotiation. The UK companies come in, not very interesting for big public. But there's a potential.
Is really the point, They need to get this deal on youth mobility, which is very difficult because on migration, there's the internal issues.
It's not going to happen, and we heard that from Sir Keir Starmer.
Well, I mean, if you look at the proposal that the Commission have made, which isn't actually a mandate because it hasn't yet been agreed by the governments, if you look at that proposal, it's pretty impossible. I mean, 4 years, total open door for anyone 18 to 30. That's very, very difficult because it will increase net migration figures, which politically, whether you like it or not, is a big issue. The abolition of extra tuition fees for Europeans, and abolition of the NHS surcharge, rejoining Erasmus. Erasmus is very expensive. It's a lot of money spent on education for non-British people. It's a big issue in Britain because we haven't got a lot
Even
of
though
money.
a lot of academics and NGOs were very upset.
Oh no, of course they were. Of course they were. The university sector
But it would also
was very
profit
upset.
UK
But
citizens. That's the thing. It would also profit UK citizens. So it's not just like a one-sided deal. It
It's-
would really
yeah,
be good also
it's-
for the UK that wants to be global Britain.
it's, unfortunately, as we're all aware, the budgetary discussions are a bit either or. And in the Department of Education in Britain, which is a bit cash-strapped, British schools are sometimes in a pretty poor shape. Education's a big political issue. And they say, do we really want to spend £130 million every year to benefit largely foreign students and largely middle-class, well-off students? And the answer is, within that department, is, well, yeah, fine, the universities like it, but why would we pay for it? We would much rather put that money into restoring the school's infrastructure. So what I'm saying is there are really difficult, when I say difficult, there are very granular discussions. The EU doesn't like Britain's marine protection policies, sand eels, fishing ban,
Fishing ban in the North
banning
Sea
on
that
bottom
use the
trawling
money.
in 13 areas, and that's going to be overturned.
There will be a
probably
lot
as
to
part
talk
of this.
about. We
There will be.
understand there will be many more meetings. There'll be summits as well next year. And meanwhile, Boris Johnson has just come out with his new book, Unleashed. I don't know, has anyone had a sneak preview?
No.
Will you be reading it?
I'll read. I mean, I've read bits of it already. It is very Boris Johnson. That's all I would say about it.
And just briefly, your final words on these talks. Do you really feel that we're going into this new chapter?
Yes, I think the point is that there's a potential, and let's not forget that Europe, EU economically became much smaller when UK left, and so if we try to find wins or even quick wins, we should look to UK.
And final comment, Sophie, from you?
Well, we'll see what happens, but it's hopefully true that the tone is going to be better from now on with Keir Starmer, and let's hope we'll find some political quick wins.
Especially as the EU now discusses enlargement, which is a major topic on the table for the next 5 years, without, of course, the big bucks from their friends in the UK. But on that point, we'll have to bring this conversation to an end, unfortunately. But for more information on that visit this week, you can, of course, check out our website. But for now, thank you so much to our panel for being with us. And thank you so much for watching. See you soon here on Euronews. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with our panel, we're just sifting through the stories that got us talking here this week. And one that stood out was this: cleaners, security guards and catering staff from the European Parliament and institutions all across the EU taking a pause from work this Tuesday to call for higher wages and better working conditions. These workers want to see collective bargaining applied when public procurement contracts are being negotiated. Among the protesters was Olivier Routing. He's the regional secretary for the European trade union, Uni Europa. We can take a listen now to his main asks.
The main demand for us is we want to see respect for workers, especially in the cleaning, in the security, in the catering services. We want to have a change of European law so that one condition for public procurement is applying a collective agreement. We can't go on going by the cheapest price. We have to go for quality. It's public money, and public money should be used for the public good.
So Olivier Routing there, the regional secretary for Uni Europa. I guess the problem here is MEPs are taking home over €8,000 per month, and many of those working behind the scenes in the institutions cannot even make ends meet. Where would your stance be on this point?
First of all, if the discussion is about the minimum wage, of course that's more on the competence of the member states. Of course, we agree.
This is about the contracts
exactly,
here,
exactly,
specifically.
And exactly the standards should be respected. What we are trying to also reflect is the situation of public finances and trying to get a level playing field.
Yeah, well, I mean, the issue seems to be here that public contracts funded by EU taxpayers are based on the lowest price. And Ursula von der Leyen, Bruno, has promised to address this issue, but she does have her hands full with other crises all around the world.
Yeah, but I mean, this issue is very specific. It's related to public procurement, and I think I totally agree with the trade unionists. He's absolutely right, and it's part of a bigger picture. And it's a bigger picture in the single market at the moment, where the single market has very clearly become about social dumping. In one of the countries that has most embraced the single market, which is the Netherlands, they're having a very, very profound debate. Rich de Boer, the head of the workplace inspection service, Thierry Artsen, who's in the VVD, Viril, used to support this. And they're saying, look, we can't go on like this. We can't go on going for the cheapest, treating people like bulk goods. But what the EU needs to do is move towards the Swiss model of having work permits that are established on going rates, so that there is no question about going for the lowest common denominator.
And this is why we saw this Tuesday, flights were cancelled here in Brussels, in Zaventem and Charleroi, the two main airports, because security staff and cleaning staff were also on the picket line. Looks like we're going into another winter of discontent.
Yes, and I think that's a really important thing. Even if the EU doesn't necessarily have the social competences in the social field, I think there's a real issue when you have a race to the bottom. And I think there's been a lot of discontent. And also it translates into a far-right vote when there's such a wage and wealth inequality. And if you look at the statistics, it's incredible how it has, become like how the scissors have become bigger, especially also during COVID when you have multi-billionaires that became extremely rich and people struggling. And I think that's something that creates a frustration.
It does indeed. And there was a report out this week as well that said CEOs are earning more than 200 times more than any other average employee. This is probably information we know, but just kind of frustrates people when they're working so hard, but they don't feel like they're getting the pay that they deserve.
Yeah, the wage problem is real, but it reflects the economic situation in Europe. You see, actually, it's not only cleaners or this segment. It's the whole 30-40% of European population is living from salary to salary, and so small changes matter.
No, I think it's really important that the EU gets out of the way of national governments being able to protect industries, protect sectors such as haulage and logistics from wage dumping, whether it comes from Romania or Poland.
And on that point, we'll have to bring this conversation to a close. But thank you so much to Bruno Waterfield, to Sophie Poinschlegel, and also to Tommy Hutanen for being our panel this weekend. And thank you, of course, for watching. Any comments for us? Don't hesitate to reach out. Brussels, my love, @euronews.com. We love hearing from you. And we're also, of course, on social media. So reach out. Take care and see you soon.